Planning board meeting, August 22nd. We have a quorum. We have Tara and Barbara and myself and Sarah, and Susan, our trustee secretary, and Max and Bill. So to the purpose of tonight's meeting is public review of changes to the land use ordinance, Article 7, which is shoreland zoning, and Article 10, which is non-conforming uses. And we'll get into that in a second. So I think everybody in the audience has copies of the proposed revisions. So as by way of introduction, these changes were required. The instigation for making these changes was because in the interim since Waldeboro's last land use ordinance revisions, the state has changed their land use ordinance
The model.
So we started this process of reviewing these two articles with the purpose of making sure that they conform with the state requirements. Waldeboro, we are allowed to have tighter requirements than the state, but we're not allowed to have looser requirements than the state. So at the same time, we apologize that you will not find the language to be particularly wonderful in the land use ordinances. We didn't try to completely rewrite the ordinances with the idea of making them clear and easy to understand on a regular basis. We've dealt with what the deck we were handed and did the best we could to clarify in some places where we thought the language was confusing. In addition, because of the changes, there are a lot of areas where we had to clean up references to other things, or we added references where you could find information that could help you understand the ordinance. And so there were some sections that we went into for clarity purposes. Thought I would summarize briefly the largest changes. Article 10, which is non-conforming uses. Non-conforming uses means generally a structure or any use on a structure or property that doesn't meet the current land use ordinance. That is generally things that are grandfathered, like a very old home that's too close to the water, that's been there before the land use ordinances were even written or revised, and it's called a non-conforming use because it doesn't meet the land use ordinance. So that's what non-conforming basically means, those things that are grandfathered. The biggest change to that article is a pretty lengthy section that goes into allowable adjustments to a structure that's various distances from the water. Generally that's allowing some modification and some small expansion of the structures. So that's really basically the largest thing, and we can go into that in detail as we wish. Article 7, the shoreland zoning ordinance. There were a lot of cleanup and clarity changes. There was also the biggest single change in terms of volume of text is timber harvesting. Previously, there was a large section in our land use ordinance regarding timber harvesting, which is allowed with certain kinds of restrictions within the shoreland zone. The state has given each municipality 3 options as to how to deal with timber harvesting. One is you let the state administer your timber harvesting. Second is sort of a blend of state help and the town. And third is the town could administer it all ourselves and have it all in the land use ordinance and handle all of that monitoring and administering ourselves. Waldeboro has chosen to take option 1, which is letting the state monitor the timber harvesting, and I think there are good reasons for making that choice, but regardless. So there's a whole chunk of the original Article 7 that you'll see that's just crossed out on timber harvesting, and there's the section that replaces it is basically like one sentence, which says, the state, go to the state. The state's in charge of monitoring the timber harvesting. That's not to say that our monitor, Stan, the code enforcement officer, thank you, getting old, that our code enforcement officer wouldn't obviously see if somebody's doing timber harvesting and make sure that the state gets involved, but the state's got to handle that. There's also 3 new sections regarding hazard and storm damage tree removal. As many of you probably aware, there are restrictions on what you can do in terms of clearing and maintenance of the land, the forest land, and the trees that are within the shoreland zone. But there wasn't a lot of clarity around what you could do in the case that there was danger from a tree or a tree was broken from a storm. So there's a whole section about hazard, storm, damage, tree removal, removal of vegetation. There's under various conditions, which are fairly strict, but for various purposes. For example, there's a small section on removing vegetation in order to stabilize the bank, in order to get in there with equipment and stabilize the bank. That's an example of something that might require removal of vegetation. But then there's a whole section on requirements for putting vegetation back and replanting trees if you have to take things out. There's a few other things in Article 7 on docks and campsites and things like that are allowed depending on the lot. The lot size has certain restrictions that allow those, and there's setbacks for tilling and grazing that have been added, and a permanent road restriction within the shoreland zone. So that's sort of the quick summary of the primary changes. So I will open it up. First, let me ask, because the board has been through this in detail a number of times. We've spent a lot of time on it. We could certainly just, again, go through this page by page, but since this is a public meeting and the folks here in the audience have not the benefit or the challenge or pain of going through it in detail that many times, I'd like to offer, at least first, if any of the public that's here has particular comments or concerns about the ordinance or how you would prefer to go through this to start with, so we can make sure that, because the point of this is for you folks as the public to get your input to us. So,
just make a
yes,
comment?
please do.
So looking at the document, just to clarify, plain text is stuff from the old ordinance, nothing's been changed. Crossed out is out of here, and underline is the new material.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bob.
So, if you wish to make any comments, just try to get my attention, and I'll call on you and identify yourself and go to it.
I'll just say what we're here for. We're just trying to learn more about the shoreline zoning as it exists, and we saw some changes and thought this is a good opportunity to learn more. We're probably non-conforming. We're up on Cross Street on the river, and so we're just learning, what are we,
Okay.
and what changes are there.
Okay.
We've never really known specifically about any possibilities,
You might find this easier to look at if you want to actually look at it and think about your own site and stuff.
So it's just us. Yeah, we don't have specific questions or
Yeah.
needs right now. We're just here to
It's
listen
actually
to-
fairly readable now. It used to
Well,
be
that
abysmal.
It's less it's not
Yeah.
horrible. Yeah, it's not too horrible.
It's not, it wouldn't take you terribly long.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'd be about expansion possibilities in the future.
Right.
If we
Yep.
were to think about that, and we saw a change of footprint versus volume or something like that, how does that relate? We don't even know.
Okay. So well, that would be then this may be helpful to you, and if you believe you're non-conforming now, then in Article 10, because that's the non-conforming uses and that's the shorter of them. I'd encourage you to read through, especially regarding tree removal and everything, if you're within the shoreland zone. But
Right.
there is a table that we added that describes the expansion limits depending on how far you are from the water. Because there's size limitations that, on the structure and the expansion, that the closer you are to the water, the smaller the structure size
I see.
and the expansion limits are. So
Well, I
you,
guess we're 100 feet, I don't know.
okay, yeah,
So, okay, so we'll look at all that.
yeah,
We'll
great,
look at it, yeah.
great,
You guys
okay.
have always been great if we have a question.
Yeah, Bill, go ahead.
Generally speaking, if you're a non-conforming structure, as long as you don't, you're okay, as long as you don't do anything or change anything. So, when you contemplate doing, whether removing vegetation or expanding, then you would really need to look at the ordinance.
Yeah.
And just a quick clarification on the non-conforming structures.
Yes.
We used to have an expansion by 30% in area and volume.
Right.
That's been simplified now, so we look at expansion of the footprint.
Right.
And in each, if you're closer than 25 feet, it's 800 square feet or 30%, which is greater footprint. If you're between, it's less than 75 feet, then it's 1,000 square feet or 30%. And if you're less than 100, it is 1,500 square feet or 30%, whichever is more.
Right.
And it's just the footprint. So
Right.
it's a little simpler.
Right, there's an overall height restriction as
Yeah,
well,
that's
so you
good.
can't build a
It
tower,
includes
but,
decks. It reads as it includes a deck. if we're-
yeah, it's overall footprint, which is building, structure, deck, whatever, yep,
Okay.
Yep.
Well, we have- Good, well, thank you.
yep. Good, okay.
Good idea to know. Okay.
Anything else from any other comments or questions from the audience, please?
Given that it looks like the impetus was
Oh,
referring.
I'm sorry, could you speak, my hearing is not great.
Freeman's resident.
Uh-huh,
Uh, This is conforming to what came out of Augusta. Is there anything at all that exceeds their requirements that the planning board in its decision-making put in?
that we've made more strict than the state requirements. We had a lot of discussions about a lot of different ones, but we have not,
Right.
that I recall, made anything stricter than the state requirements. Again, we went through a lot of different ones and options, and I think I would say the ones that we spent the most time on that we still didn't end up changing, we didn't have enough scientific information on which to go on to decide how to make it stricter. So we didn't add any more restrictions. So I think that's fair to say. That said, I think there are quite a bit of restrictions in here, so there are certainly limitations on what you can do. And I think the two biggest ones are on structure size relative to the adjacency to the water, and maintaining the tree, not clear-cutting, clear-cut requirements, limitations on the trees and things that you can do near the shore.
But my understanding from Max is that you're really compelled by Maine law to make these changes. No, you don't really have discretion not to conform to Augusta.
That's right.
Right, correct, other than making it more restrictive, which, right,
So, but to the extent that you simply mirrored them, this is simply something you have to do by a matter of law and statute.
yes, correct, yep,
And a lot of the things that we've discussed are actually been in the same ordinance since 2005.
Right,
So in
right.
fact, they're old history and old,
Yep.
you might think of them as maybe old ways of doing things, but.
yeah, I would say that to mirror that, because I agree with you completely, is that that all that discussion on things that were already in there were also a lot about making it clear, trying to make it clearer language. Like between the seven of us, and Bill and Max, we spent a lot of time making sure that, which is our job as the board, we have to be able to interpret the land use ordinance, is making sure, do we understand what this language means? And we spent a lot of time trying to go through that and trying to make it clearer and easier to read. the changes that the state made gave us an opportunity to do a little bit of that.
Scott Bell's comment.
Bill?
Bill?
Just a quick comment to that. If
Yeah.
the state gives us time to make these changes, if we don't, they impose the changes on us. So we have to address it.
Yeah.
They're pretty liberal in allowing us plenty
Right.
of time to do it.
Yep.
But if we were recalcitrant, they would just tell us, here's your ordinance.
Yeah. I think we've had some discussion, you may be aware that, the town finished their comprehensive plan. There's going to be a committee to look at the land use ordinance relative to the comprehensive plan, to look at making changes to not just these things, but the overall land use ordinance, to look to make changes to make it clearer or improve it, and so there'll be members of the planning board on that group. Because there are some things that have changed. I think a good example that we spent a lot of time on is like event centers, farmers markets, things like that, that aren't really that well defined within the current land use ordinance, and those are happening all the time now, and it's not clear where to put some of these things that are new business models that didn't exist then, that the town needs to adjust to. And if you can imagine, the total land use ordinance.
I got it over here if you want.
Is like this, that's a lot to take on, so that, God bless that group that's gonna do that. I am not on that
Mine is
team.
half that size. Why is yours so big?
Why is mine so big? I think,
Is it
because
the
I have,
state stuff?
I think I have the legal training stuff in the back of it,
I
anyway.
just wanted to take a minute to
Yes,
illustrate
please.
that it wasn't necessarily the level of restriction, but just the level of clarity that we're now adopting. So I think it's on 7-26. We had talked a lot about non-native species removal and what does that constitute and what is, how is that defined? And the state language had already, I believe, been put in, correct me if I'm wrong, Bill, but it looks like new language. But just to say that you have to remove non-native species, invasive species within this 25-foot area with mechanical hand tools. So it's very specific language that we're looking at already. So, being sort of even-handed in how restrictive you really want to be on top of that. And not that we couldn't, and not that people still don't have the opportunity to comment. Certainly, there's going to be a select board meeting where they'll be reviewing these documents, and I encourage folks to read and submit their comments if they feel so moved. But I do think that the state was very comprehensive in how they addressed some of these sections. Hazard trees, I think there's one video where we got a little bit of a chuckle over the length to which dead tree was defined.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of comprehensiveness in going forward that wasn't necessarily restrictive, but it does give you a lot of guidance that we might not have had before.
So, all that said, any other comments from the audience? Yes, please.
Yes, John Lawrence, resident. Simply, Article 7, paragraph C.
First page?
Yes.
Okay.
In there's a lot of language that's very general in nature that I'd like to, if you wouldn't mind, could we just get a general overview by just having a general, read through this to us, and then we can ask questions as we go, kind of format on paragraph.
Just that paragraph?
Yes.
Okay. So,
The applicability
Yeah,
is
go ahead.
standard right from
Right.
the state statute where the shoreline zone applies.
Right.
It's within 250 feet of the high water line of various water bodies.
Yeah, the various part is what I'm wondering about.
Yeah, the water bodies that are restricted in shoreline zoning are tidal waters, so it would be along our coast, ponds, great ponds that are defined as greater than 10 acres, not man-made, wetlands over a certain size. It doesn't include forested wetlands and streams, but not all streams. Streams are defined in the ordinance, and it's typically, a stream is at the confluence of two streams, where two streams meet and there's a stream that goes out of it, or outlet streams from a pond on that. And also, wetlands are also included if they are part of that 250-foot area from like a pond or a coastal waterway. So just by an example, if we have a pond, we have 250 feet back, but there's a wetland there also that extends further back, that wetland would come under the shoreline zone.
Okay, so, as using a real example, in North Waldeboro, which is approximately 250 feet above sea level, there are numerous wetlands that are treed or partially treed
Yeah.
that eventually do gather in streams as per your definition.
Yeah,
Are they applied?
typically not. Probably the best place to look is, we have a shoreline zoning map that maps the applicable wetlands. There, again, shoreline zoning doesn't include forested wetlands at all, and they have to be wetlands over a certain size.
Right, well, as you know, maybe, or here again, a practical observation. There are wetlands in North Waldeboro that come and go based on beaver dams that come and go. And when they rise up, those wetlands, they kill the trees for a while.
Right.
Then the trees come back if someone removes
Right.
the beaver dam. What is, and that there are situations that exist.
Yeah, those
how is that being
typically,
handled?
speaking, generally speaking, those wouldn't be covered under shoreline zoning, but they are covered by other laws. The Department of Environmental Protection protects all wetlands regardless of size or type or things like that. So that's a whole separate, separate thing. Shoreline zoning is fairly restrictive, just to certain areas.
But it does extend all the way up to Madomic Ponds,
Oh, yeah, there
All the
are a
way
number
up
of
into those-
ponds, absolutely.
the headwaters of the river.
Oh, yeah, the Madomic River, it goes all the way up, absolutely.
And if there are little ponds on farmland that do not have streams,
We don't cover those, under shoreline zoning.
Less than 10 acres, right?
okay?
Yeah.
These are, you can get these definitely
Right, I've
online.
seen that.
Yep.
There's a lot of little ponds
Yeah,
Yeah.
all around up
they have to
there.
be, we don't include man-made ponds. for the
I'm
most
talking
part.
about natural,
Yeah.
in Massachusetts, they call them vernal ponds.
Yeah.
Vernal pools.
Pools,
Mm.
yeah.
Yeah,
They're all
that
around
type-
up there.
That
Yeah.
type of wetland is protected by DEP, the Natural Resource Protection Act, but not necessarily by shoreline
Yep.
zoning.
Okay.
Because a lot, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Bill, but because there's a size limitation of the size of the water body has to be a certain size to be covered by shoreland, because this is really related to use of the land and putting structures on it. And so if it's a tiny pond, one tree and you're clear cut to it, it doesn't really require this level of
Right, I understand that.
sophistication.
Thank
But
you.
but I think it's important that it's covered by the
Yeah, there are
overall
there are other
wetlands.
laws,
Yeah,
I mean, typically, if someone's going to develop something, particularly a subdivision, the subdivision law states that you have to identify all the wetlands in the parcel, regardless of size or type.
Right.
So that's one occasion where, or if you build a road, you're going to have to, just as an example.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm happy to jump through this in any way we would like to. I think it would be, judged by experience, it would be quite time-consuming to go through every change. But if you'd like, we can sort of run through this quickly and pick out the most important points, if you'd prefer to do that, or if everybody wants to go home, you're more than welcome. So let me just point out, from Article 7, all the first few pages are really just for clarity and cleaning up references. The overall land use table did not change with this iteration. There were no changes to the land use table. Our purposes of having this conform to the state requirements didn't require any changes to that. We didn't make any. However, we did find some things that were the references at the bottom of the table with the reference numbers. We removed a couple of those that had been in there but didn't refer to anything. And those changes had been from a couple of iterations ago, because those existed in the last land use ordinance, and so those are listed as removed, just for clarity.
Is this the time where I'm supposed to raise anything that we should be changing if it was caught now? Just asking, matter of protocol.
If there's something you think we should be changing that we didn't get, you should bring it up now.
Land use table, I noted that resource protection, marine protection, commercial fisheries and maritime activities were crossed out, and they are otherwise noted in the table and in other sections of this document, so I don't recommend striking them.
Commercial fisheries / maritime activities?
All three of the abbreviations, RP, SP, and the CFMA.
I crossed those out because the order that we just changed it to was it to SP, RP, LR, LC, GD, and then CFMA. And the order right now is RP, SP, LR.
So they're still there.
Will it
You're
be
just
changed in
changing-
the rest of the
you're just
document?
changing
Because
the
I think it
order?
comes up as other.
I'm not sure what you're saying, Tara. They're crossed out, but they're still there.
It's just.
Oh,
how they're
okay, I
ordered
see
there.
what
They're
you're
still
saying.
there, it's just the order has changed.
Because if you look at how
I see, yeah.
it's
Those RP.
presented in the columns, it goes SP, RP, LR, LC, GD,
Gotcha.
CFMA.
It's just the order.
So it's just putting them in that order.
Just seeing if you were awake.
I was not. We've been looking at this for over a year.
I think that was one of the first things that was changed.
Okay.
So that might be why
Was I not here that day?
I don't.
I don't know.
I think that's what happened.
Okay.
And my other concern was
Yeah.
just 6, under clearing and removal of vegetation for other allowed uses, under like 3J and 18A, were there pieces that talked about, let me see specifically. Now I'm scared to say it out loud because I could be wrong.
I certainly don't have the most up-to-date.
Yeah, so
This
3J,
should be
vegetation may be removed,
Max number that last time
provided
was
that a permit is obtained from planning board.
What page is this?
This is 710. So where are we? Because a couple of them say CEO, so I'm just making sure that the tables are all lining up. That was all. And obviously,
In the paragraph 3J though, it refers to removal in excess of the standards.
okay.
So it's a situation that exceeds the authority of a code officer.
Okay. And timber harvesting, are we leaving in there? As CEO, and yes.
In the table?
Yes, in 5.
What number is that? Oh,
7.
forest management?
5.
Forest
Oh, 5,
management
timber
and
harvesting,
5,
yes.
timber harvesting.
Correct.
Okay.
So,
It refers to note 13, no permit required to cut wood for personal use in conformance with Maine Bureau of Forestry guidelines.
Okay. And then yes, must comply with land use standards. So should that one be Bureau of Forestry too, or no?
Are you saying for 5 where it says CEO, just
the state?
Yeah, all state standards.
Or should there be a note in there that it's?
Well, isn't that section 7F17? Isn't that what that is?
Section 7F, maybe.
I told you I was happy to send all these by email. It could be my personal comments.
Okay, well, we can do that, but if there's something that, that, I don't think is correct, because I thought it was, let's see, where is the timber harvesting? $718, what it was. So timber harvesting is now section 16. So it looks like it should be section 16. 7, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Section 16, Article
So it should be
7.
16, right?
Just because the yes.
So it should be Article, oh, there it is, yeah, section 16, so it's fine. Yep,
So as long as it refers to that, you don't
Correct, I
have to put
think-
anything else that says, okay.
yeah, I think so. So, let's see. Other than clarity items, the first significant changes are on page 7.7, which is non-vegetated surfaces. So there's basically a 20% limit overall for anything that's non-vegetated. So that total of all structures and parking lot. So there was this limitation doesn't apply to public boat launching facilities, and then there's a general development section that was added that allows 70% for general development of commercial fishery, 70% coverage. So that's basically to limit the amount of hard surface that's going to create runoff rather than absorbing.
That's correct.
So for most of the shoreland, it's a 20% coverage limit, unless it's in the general development district or a commercial fishery application. There's a section added on page 7.9 that that sort of adds, I think this is basically adding the ability to put a second dock on a single lot if the single lot has at least twice the minimum shore frontage.
So if you have 400 feet.
Right.
you can add two.
And then, but then there's a restriction that the lot is not further divided, so that was an addition. Page 710 starts the sections I referred to, well, there was a section about removing vegetation for construction to stabilize the shoreline, and then you have to revegetate it. So you can't just take the vegetation out without putting it back. There's a description of a deck over a river. This section was sort of added at the request of the municipality.
Yeah, this
You
came
can
as
explain
a
that better.
result of a lot of trails that were contemplated along water bodies, and there was conflicts with the older shoreland zoning because of setbacks of structures and development. So they allowed these trails to exist along, particularly rivers, we find a lot, and coastal areas.
And I just wanted to note here in my original notes, because I think you said specifically this came from a different municipality, so they had language around formerly used as mills, and we had thrown out the idea
Oh,
of using
right.
as, other structures
Right.
commercial and industrial, formerly used commercial and industrial purposes. So if that was something, a change we wanted to make, or if we just wanted to leave it as mills,
I think we decided to leave it the way it was.
just as mills. It was just left it very,
Yeah.
Yeah,
okay.
But I think that this is related to, you know, right at the downtown on the shore, like some of those buildings, to allow the possibility of some development for that building, like the Button Factory, to put a deck on it or something like that, as
that's a
part
good
of a
point.
development project. There's a section on page 711, part 5B, on an individual campsite proposed on a lot that already has a structure. The lot has to be big enough to separately accommodate both a campsite and a principal structure. So you can't, even for a campsite, you can't just jam it into a lot that's not big enough to accommodate both in terms of area. I think it's what, 30, I think in part A it says 30,000 square feet is required. Only one recreational vehicle allowed per campsite. There is a whole separate section on campsites in the land use ordinance. This is just relative to the shoreland. On page 714, part C, there's a change that no new permanent roads are not allowed within the shoreland zone, except under certain circumstances.
Yeah, that's in significant river segments.
Yeah,
Exception. We don't have significant river segments in town,
oh,
but they're
okay,
defined in statute.
okay,
But we may in the future. You know.
we might. Let's see. A lot of other clarity changes and references.
717 was a big one, I think, for,
Well, let's see, yeah, 7
we
in
discussed
page,
it a lot.
page.
Just noting that the manure guidelines would apply to more than 50 animals as we know it.
No, that's not what Bill said. He
was
said
it?
It
manures.
applies to all.
It was all, okay.
Yeah, it includes all.
Was the conservation?
Because it's not a facility, it's a manure storage area. It's manure storage.
Okay.
So then there's the large section on timber harvesting that's been removed. I think if there's any other large ones we want to, is the section starting on the bottom, page 723, on the hazard trees. And
Expensive.
most of that's a code enforcement officer related thing. Storm damaged trees, exemptions to clearing and vegetation removal requirements, which is, you can do that for public swimming areas, allowed agricultural uses.
That's the first time we have clarity on that issue, as you mentioned.
And then revegetation requirements, there's quite a bit on that, and we,
So the timber guidelines from the state, is that something that's just going to be readily available at the town office for people to?
You can go online and get it from Department of Forestry. Actually, they're
That is?
very responsive to the citizen questions.
have we had a lot of that in town?
No, but there's some. There's timber harvesting, not, outside of shoreline. zone.
Yeah,
There's quite a-
right, yeah. Okay, let's see. So I didn't have any other things to point out specifically on Article 7.
I did, sorry, one more.
Yeah,
731, application fees, with just small change, I thought, and maybe I was wrong, that we had agreed that we were going to say application fee made payable to the town of Waldeboro in case we ever advance to the point where we're like swiping debit cards across people's heads or something of that nature. But that was the only thing, just so we don't have to go back and revise an ordinance to make that change.
I thought that is here.
No, it's underlined as being in, so not.
But it says made payable to the town of Waldeboro.
But paid in
Cash or
cash.
check.
in
So we
cash.
took out cash or check entirely was my.
Previous to it,
Oh,
so it
oh,
says-
Took out cash or check?
Yeah, it just said made payable.
Bring your gold nuggets. Yeah, made payable, right.
What are we doing? I guess we're taking.
Makes
So
sense?
we're gonna delete that.
Yeah.
I'm fine.
Taking it out,
Take it out,
take it out,
take it out, clean it up, make it shorter.
so.
So it will read, all applications shall be accompanied by an application fee made payable to the town of Waldeboro.
Excellent.
Made payable.
Made payable. All right, so that-
You use your debit card, or you,
Well, I'm just saying, would that come under the definition made payable? Should it be by an application fee paid to the town of Waldeboro?
Next we'll be asking about the comma.
Right? No. I think it should just say application fee paid to
Yep.
the town of Waldeboro.
that's fine.
Paid to?
Paid to the town of Waldeboro. Yeah.
Okay.
Get one of those little card readers and we'll be all set. Okay.
On to non-conforming?
Sure, let's go to that. We'll go to Article 10 briefly, and we're happy to go back.
Extra copy of non-conforming? Is there another one
Oh, I'm
around?
sure, maybe Max has another one?
Article 10?
I might have it. Non-conforming, yeah,
Yeah. Sarah, could you grab that?
I might have
Thank
it.
you.
Hold on.
Oh, here.
Oh, thank you.
Okay. Article 10, starting on 10.2, the whole section of this shoreland, starting shoreland freshwater and shoreland areas, all these non-conforming setbacks and specialist expansion allowances. That entire section, running the next 3 pages, has all been removed and replaced with the language that starts on page 10.7D, shoreland area expansions. So they're basically, those whole sections are basically accomplishing the same thing. It's just new language replacing all this. It's clearer, even though it might not seem that way at first reading. It's actually clearer and easier to understand than the section that it replaces. And so it's valuable language. I would encourage you to read through it.
I think the only other thing that it kind of goes into more detail is the level of the basement, right? If
Yes,
this
good
new-
point.
This new language describes what level the basement has to be at relative to the adjacent water body, is that right? 2 feet above,
Yeah, I think it retained, there was, hold on for a second.
Yeah, see if I can,
I thought
I
that
think
was
that the Waldeboro's
Yeah,
was
it's just-
ahead of the curve, but I gotta find it.
Yeah, on page 10-8, foundations, is that what you're referring to?
Yep.
Whenever a new or enlarged or replacement foundation is constructed under a non-conforming structure, the structure and the new foundation must be placed such that the setback requirements met to the greatest practical extent.
well, actually, that's not what I meant.
There's a limitation on the distance above the 100-foot floodplain somewhere, I thought.
Well, yeah, that's a standard.
Yeah,
Yeah, it has to be 2 feet above the base flood level.
yep.
Yeah.
Is that in this section, or is it?
No, it's in Article 7.
It's in
Oh, it
Article
was,
7.
okay. Okay.
Yeah, that's something that is applicable from our floodplain management.
Yeah,
Okay, right, that makes sense.
which is a good point, though. There is a limitation on the bottom floor, whether it's a basement or the ground floor of a structure, of a new structure, has to be no closer than 2 feet above the 100-foot floodplain. I believe it's 2 feet, which Waldeboro's actually, I think, ahead of the curve a little bit on that, because I think there are a lot of towns that didn't have any requirement in their ordinance. Is
Well,
that fair? Or was there a state? Was there
No,
a
if
state
you
requirement?
have, in order to have flood insurance available to people, you have to adopt a floodplain management ordinance.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, this article, it took away the volume and area calculations, which were cumbersome for everyone.
Yep.
We went just to the footprint, which made it clear.
We also added a great new table to this section.
Yeah,
Thanks, Scott.
That's a local, what you call it,
Enhancement.
addition, enhancement, that's good.
Clerk?
A new table.
Yeah, the bottom of
10-8.
page 10.8,
Scott's expansion limits table.
it's just a summary table. It's not, doesn't define the limitations, but it basically puts in table form the restrictions of the various distances from the water, the maximum size of the structure allowed and the maximum structure height allowed.
Takes it from the narrative, puts it in a table.
Right. Yes, please.
I have a math question.
Yeah.
If you, this is for non-conforming, but if you had someone new and you wanted to go on the river and you wanted to work on and build the house, so they would exceed the 1,500 feet, so they would have, you couldn't go within 250 feet, is that correct?
Well, if it's new construction, they would have to be set back 100 feet if it's a great pond, and 75 feet if it's a tidal water. So you couldn't go any closer than that if it's new construction.
If it's new, I'm looking, it says 1,500 feet for the footprint is the max, within 250 feet of the water.
No, the 1,500 feet, in this section for nonconformity, it's, there's 3 tiers. If you're closer than 25 feet, it's 800, closer than 75, it's 1,000, and closer than 100, it's 1,500. So if you're between 100 and 75, you maxed out at 1,500. If you're between 75 and 25,
So
you
if
maxed
you're,
out at 1,000.
so if you're between 100 and 250 feet, what's the?
Oh, yeah, if you're, there is, the only cap on the building is, as Scott mentioned, there's a total limitation to the amount of impervious areas, yeah.
But there's no, okay, but it wouldn't, after 100 feet, there's no square footage
No,
limitation
no.
if you need to turn the building.
As long as you meet that cap, yeah. I'm sorry, I didn't.
Well, I think that is an important point. So within the shoreland zone, as long as you're 100 feet from the water, you're still allowed to build a structure.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, please.
Where they talk about the maximum structure height,
Yes?
if you have a walkout basement, like, does it start at the basement level or?
Oh, if you have a walkout basement?
Yeah, we have a definition, you have to look in the definition section, it tells you, how you define it, yeah. Yeah, I believe it averages out the height.
Thank you.
Do you want me to read the footprint definition?
No, it's not footprint, this is, it's from the basement. Actually, that comes up a lot with the basements, there's,
So these definitions, Bill, if these go through the select board, get voted on, can these be modified?
sure.
The definitions can be modified, okay.
Yeah, we have to just, have to compare it to the model to make sure we don't
Oh,
go off too much.
Yeah, this is the first time I've seen them, so we have time to 100% I've seen them.
No, they've been distributed for quite some time.
These,
I think we've only had maybe 1 or 2 meetings to actually talk about the definitions with
Yeah.
how much a meeting always went to 7 and 10.
We had some of these, but
Yeah, we only
We're getting this whole
added
thing.
the new ones and changed the existing ones to change the ones that were in the new model. But we didn't make any other modifications.
Does anyone mind if I step out and share this height of a structure?
Sure.
Is that the definition we were looking for, or was it the basement one?
It was the height of the structure.
Height of a structure?
Yeah, we kind of saw that, okay.
Yeah.
You saw it already?
Yeah, we found it.
Okay.
Thank you. Well, thank you.
Probably goes without saying for our audience that particularly in non-conforming, if you're, or cutting vegetation in the shoreline zone, it's always good to call the code officer. They will come out and meet with you and go over the requirements so it's clear to everybody what needs to be done or what are the restrictions. So they're
Yeah.
pretty easy to deal with. Yeah.
Right. Thank you.
While people are looking at that, I'll just briefly explain, just in addition to our review and the select board approval and approval at the town meeting or at the vote in November, after that, if the ordinance changes are approved by the town, we have to submit them to the DEP, and they have to review and approve them. And technically, the changes aren't in effect until the DEP issues their approval.
Yeah.
It usually takes anywhere between 30 and 90 days or so.
From November?
Yeah, after the vote, yeah.
so I find that curious. Why wouldn't it go to the DEP before the town bothers to vote on it? Before, so there would be an opportunity
That's
to
in the
revise
stat-
it before?
That's in the statute.
Interesting approach.
I concur with you wholeheartedly, but
Just the way it goes. Yeah, okay, yeah. It's not how it works.
Good luck trying to
That's okay.
change that.
All right, well, then it would be another,
well,
before
what
we
they
could have
do,
another
if they don't
vote.
like something, they approve it, what they call conditional. So if they didn't like a section, they would approve it conditional and just tell us, this is what you would need to insert for this section.
Okay. Well, hopefully we won't run into that. I don't recall anything that we did that day, but you never know.
I wouldn't anticipate it.
Yeah. So I don't want to, I want to make sure people have time to go through it. I don't want to cut this arbitrarily short. But I don't have anything else to cover, and I don't know if there's anything else that,
On definition.
did you have something on definitions?
Just probably more for general land use ordinance as we continue to talk about buffer area and what that really means to
Uh-huh.
this town,
Yeah.
as what it would mean to shoreland zoning. But that is something I believe that probably land use committee is being charged with as well. We are aware. And then I think herbaceous vegetation kept cropping up, so maybe that term, herbaceous vegetation, I had some notes that we all wanted to know if lawn grass could be included. I saw references that were possible under page 7-8. And also, I believe it was in Article 7, it looks like 17.3.5 was another possibility, but just noting that there were some possible herbaceous definitions.
Was that actually referred to in page 7, 8? I don't recall.
What's your
thought we had
question or
removed-
comment, Tara? I see herbaceous vegetation. You feel it's not?
Oh, here it
We
is.
had kicked it back and forth a few times on what it really meant. I think you and I had had a good, good stirring conversation about whether lawn grass could be included. But I don't, they have several references within the shoreland zoning itself, but I don't know that it's ever clearly defined. But again, pieces that could certainly be picked up with land use committee and not necessarily the charge of this group.
Usually that's in context to the vegetative barrier or duff layer. Yeah, grass is not,
There are some pieces where it references grass, but it's not,
sometimes it's outside between the area 100 feet and 250 feet, you would find that, but that, the first 100 feet, or 75, depending on the water body, that's supposed to be maintained as the original duff layer, low and high vegetation, plants, bushes, whatever.
Right,
Not
not
moved
grass,
weapons.
because grass is too much runoff from grass compared
Yeah,
to
unless
woody
it's a-
vegetation, yeah.
Unless that's the natural vegetation in that area,
Yep,
which you'd find that in tidal areas, maybe a little more in the
reed grass.
ponds or
Mhm.
something like that. Or inland wetlands, something.
Well, is herbaceous vegetation defined in the definition section?
it's not in
I don't know.
definitions. It may be
It's not.
something that the later committees want to consider adding. For posterity and clarity.
Yeah, we spent our time on what a sapling was, I
We
think.
really nailed that.
We really got that one down.
Didn't we define that somewhere?
Yeah, I
It's in
think
the
we did.
definitions.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah. Actually, that's a big one for Shoreland.
We didn't include whips though.
That would include
Whip.
whips.
Whips are small,
Oh.
small seedlings.
Well, seems yeah.
So anything else we should, is everyone in the audience satisfied, or any other input you want to give us? As I think Bill said, but what the next step is, we present this to the select board on Tuesday, which I believe is also a
This
public
upcoming
meeting,
Tuesday. Yep.
for their review and possible comment. And I believe that that's the last point that changes could be made, as the select board could decide to make some changes. And then then with their approval, it goes to a town vote to adopt the changes,
That'd be in November.
November, yeah.
the November election. So, please vote.
Vote early, vote often.
Or vote early, vote. Anyway,
Get a free copy
Just
of the
kidding.
Shoreland.
yes, a free additional copy of the ordinance.
What else is being voted on in
Signed by
November?
the planning board.
Anything?
Any
anything
other town
interesting
items on
being
the,
voted
yeah, that's a good question.
In November?
No.
Is this the only thing? Gonna draw a huge crowd.
I don't think there's,
I'm not aware of it.
I'll vote.
no?
Well, maybe we
We'll
should give
find out
out
on Tuesday.
autographed copies.
What's that?
Maybe we should give out autographed.
Autograph copies. It depends on who the autograph,
Well, we could autograph that.
we could autograph them.
Get to make
That'll
our
draw
own
the
Drake
crowd.
to
It'll
come
be
in.
like Shoreland.
Our own-
Yeah,
our own trade
yeah,
That's right.
stats.
We just need to close the public
yeah,
hearing.
yeah. So if there are no other questions or comments, we thank especially the public who came. We're very glad that you're here to provide input and comment, and we do appreciate your presence and making us feel
We
the
hate
town
talking to
involvement is
ourselves.
important, that we're not just talking to ourselves. And it is important. So we appreciate your being here, and Susan and Bill and Max helping us out. And so I will ask for a motion that we adjourn.
A motion that we adjourn?
Is there a second? All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carried. We are adjourned.